morning, students. Today we will talk about clinical examination of cranial nerves. Few cranial nerves have already been discussed, that is second cranial nerve. So today we will talk about 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerve. So this whole section would be divided into two parts. So before we go, I would just like to quote a statement by William Osler, who had said that a good physician treats the disease, and a great physician treats the patient who has a disease. So whenever we look for some signs and symptoms, we have to consider patient as a whole. We should not focus on a specific organ. We should treat the patient as a whole. So today's learning objectives would be assessment of facial nerve, vagus nerve, that is 10th nerve, and glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the 9th cranial nerve. So before we always start with clinical examination, we should always introduce yourself to the patient. We should make the patient comfortable, ask him to sit on the chair, obtain his details like his name, age, gender, his occupational details, education qualification. Why all these things are important? Because we have to explain the details of the examination in a patient-friendly language. So depending on his educational qualification, we can try to use a language which a patient can understand. At the same time, we have to gain consent for examination. And before proceeding to the clinical examination, it is important to ask for pain, whether he is having pain in any specific part, so that that portion should be assessed at the last. So, going for general examination pertaining to cranial nerves 7, 9, 10, we should look for facial asymmetry. So if the person's face seems to be having asymmetrical features, it could be a sign for facial nerve palsy. Also look for if there is any overflow of tears. When you observe the speech of the patient, observe for nasal twang if it is present or absent. Ask if the patient has loss of taste. Ask for history of dysphagia, that is history of difficulty in swallowing, or if he has pain during swallowing. When he talks, also observe for dysarthria, whether there is any problem for pronunciation of specific words, or he is not able to articulate his speech well. So all these things have to be observed before you actually start assessing the person. Now, what are the equipments we need to assess these cranial nerves, that is 7th, 9th and 10th. So first and most important thing, cotton balls, sterile cotton balls. Then we need some taste solutions. I mean, because we know that facial nerve also assesses taste. So when we use taste solution, we need a dropper. First, if you have 3 solutions, we need 3 separate droppers. Then we need swabs. We also need paper and pen, a torch, and the most important, hand sanitizer. It could be either sanitizer or soap and water. So always before assessing the patient, you have to observe hand sanitization. Either wash your hands with soap and water or make use of hand sanitizer. Now let us see how do we look for facial nerve. So facial nerve, you see here, the green structure which is highlighted over this diagram is a facial nerve, and you see this nerve is supplying almost all the muscles of the facial, I mean the scalp and head. So facial nerve gives or carries motor information, that is, it supplies the muscles of facial expression, that is, all muscles of face and scalp except levator palpebrae superioris, which is supplied by 3rd cranial nerve, that is oculomotor nerve. And also it supplies platysma. Along with this muscles is also innervate stapedius muscle, which is a small muscle present in middle ear, which anchors the footplate of stapes to the middle ear. And it also carries sensory information, that is information of taste from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So these are all the functions of the facial nerve. So Once you know what is the function of the facial nerve, accordingly you have to plan assessment of that nerve. So to assess the motor function, so these are all the equipments we need. So looking for inspection for facial nerves specifically, when you look at the subject, you have to observe if there is any loss of wrinkles over the forehead or brow movements. Is the person able to close his eyes, or he has got drooping of eyelids? Is there any loss of nasolabial fold? So this is known as nasolabial fold. So whether it is present or absent, or this is what is the angle of the lips. So angle of the mouth. So is the angle of the mouth drooping? So that is what you have to observe. And epiphora, or the overflow of tears. So this is what is depicted in this figure. So after this observation, now let us start how to assess facial movements. So first and foremost, important thing is to give proper instructions to the subject so as to elicit appropriate response from the subject. So giving set of instructions is very important. Now, we have to ask the subject to carry a sequence of facial expressions. So the best way is to start with the uppermost facial muscles and then slowly you go downwards so that you don't miss any facial muscles in the order. Then second most important point to be remembered is we are assessing both sides of the muscles simultaneously and comparing both of them. So while you do this, you observe for any asymmetry. Why facial muscles are important? Because they form an important component of non-verbal communication. So as you see in this picture, smiling, laughing, frowning, all these expressions requires muscles of facial expression. Now let us see one by one. So here we are asking the subject to raise his eyebrows. So when you raise the eyebrows, what you observe is the horizontal wrinkling of the skin of the forehead. So this action is facilitated by the frontal belly of occipitofrontalis. So when you ask the person to raise his eyebrows, you are assessing frontal belly of occipitofrontalis. So this is the muscle that is the frontal belly of occipitofrontalis. So if there is palsy of unilateral side, what you see in this patient is loss of this horizontal wrinkles on the forehead. So if this is absent means this side the facial nerve is involved. Now again in this, so look at this area between the eyebrows. So what we do is we ask the subject to draw both the eyebrows together like this. So when you ask the subject to draw the eyebrows together, what you observe is horizontal, vertical wrinkling now over the glabella. So this is an expression of frowning like this. So by doing this, you assess muscle corrugator supercilii. So this muscle, it causes vertical wrinkling over the glabella. So this is the location of corrugator supercilii. So asking the subject to draw the eyebrows together. So this is how you assess corrugator supercilii. Now another very important is asking the subject to shut his eyes as tightly as possible. And after the subject closes his eyes, you try to open. So this is how you place your fingers. Okay, so after the person closes his eyes tightly, you will keep your fingers like this over the eyes and then you try to open the eyelids. So when the person, how do you assure that the person has tightly shut his eyes? The eyelashes are almost buried inside. So this is how you can judge whether he has tightly shut his eyes or not. So once this assurance is confirmed, then you try to open the eyes. So this action is carried by muscle orbicularis oculi. So when this is the muscle orbicularis oculi. So when you close your eyes, this muscle comes into action. So when there is weakness of orbicularis oculi, what you see is you can easily open the closely tight eyelids. Next, so when there is weakness of orbicularis oculi, so what you see is this, look at this eyelid. There is failure of upper eyelid closure. So this phenomena is known as lag of thalamus, means there is inability to close the eye completely. So this, in this patient, in this figure, you see that the right side is affected. The right upper eyelid is not able to close completely. So this is known as lag of thalamus. What is Bell's phenomenon? So when he is closing this eye, you see that the eyeballs have moved up. So up-rolling of the eyeball. So whenever you try to close the eye, so there it is associated with up-rolling of eyeball. So this is known as Bell's phenomena, which is typically seen in weakness of orbicularis oculi. Also at the same time, you see the lower eyelid is sagging, means it is turned outwards. So this is known as ectropion. So ectropion is sagging of the lower eyelid, or it is turned outwards. Now why this is important? Because if you look at this diagram, you see here, the lower punctum is in close approximation with the eyeball, so which helps in draining of the tears to the lacrimal sac and then to the tear duct. So when there is outward turning of the lower eyelid, this approximation is lost and the tear starts flowing outwards, means the overflow of tear occurs, which is known as epiphora. So weakness of orbicularis oculi is also associated with ectropion and epiphora. So this is another very important sign you have to observe. Next, very easy and with fun is ask the subject to blow out his cheeks like this. And then you tap with fingers. So once the subject has blown out his cheeks, so this is how you tap with the finger on the cheeks. Normally, if the strength of the muscle is intact, there will be no leak of air from the angle of the mouth. So when you are assessing, what you do is you keep one side of the hand over the angle of the mouth and feel for the air leak. So if there is any air leak, it can be easily felt with the hand. So once you tap with the finger, if there is paralysis of either side, the air will leak from the paralyzed side. And when you do this movement, you are assessing buccinator muscle. Okay. So when you ask the subject to blow out his cheek, the muscle you assess is buccinator. So buccinator is located here. So you must be wondering why I have shown image of Lord Krishna. As you know, Lord Krishna is always seen blowing the flute. So this is another very important muscle which we assess, that is orbicularis oculi. So here we ask the subject to purse or pucker her lips like this. So when you are doing this, we assess orbicularis oculi, oris. We assess orbicularis oris. Oris is mouth, oculi is near the eyes. This is also known as kissing muscle. So this is how orbicularis oris is present around the lips. So puckering will cause, when you contract orbicularis oris, it leads to puckering of the lips. So another action you ask the subject to do is to whistle. So when you ask the subject to whistle, you are assessing two muscles at a time. That is orbicularis oris as well as buccinator. So this is orbicularis oris and this is buccinator. So whistling. Here, Next muscle to assess, we ask the subject to show his teeth like this. So when he shows his teeth, what you look for is the angle of the mouth. So by doing this action, we are assessing levator angularis oris. So when contraction of this muscle causes elevation of the angles of mouth at the corner. So a very important sign we look for is any deviation of the angle of mouth. So if there is palsy of this muscle, the angle of the mouth won't be elevated, and there you can see drooping of this side of the angle of mouth. So this is how the levator angularis is located. So when it contracts, shortening of this belly causes elevation of the angle of mouth. Now there are few set of muscles which are known as laughing muscles. Now let us see which muscles we assess when we laugh. So again we have a pair of two muscles, that is rizoris and zygomatic major. So this is risorius, small muscle over here, which is present at the angle of the mouth, and this is zygomaticus major, again located near the angle of the mouth. So when both of this muscle contract, it pulls the angles of the mouth superior laterally. So this is how, whenever these muscles are used for laughing. Next, what will happen if there is weakness of all this group of muscles? So as you know that risorius, zygomaticus major and levator angularis oris are in close association with the angle of mouth. So if there is weakness of these muscles, it will lead to depression of angle of mouth on that side. So if there is, in this subject, if you see, there is loss of wrinkling of wrinkles over the forehead. If you look here, there is ectropion, there is loss of nasolabial fold. And if you look at the right angle, it is less prominent as compared to the left side. So when you ask the person to smile, what will happen? The angle of the mouth is drawn more towards the left side. That is, why this happens is because of unopposed action of the healthy muscles of the left side. So the healthy muscles will pull that angle more towards the midline. So by looking at this figure, we can say that the person has got weakness of the right facial nerve. Now, another very cute expression is depression of lower lips, like this. So when you do this, this is the expression of frustration or doubt. So by doing this action, what we are assessing is three muscles, that is depressor or labii inferioris, which is also known as quadratus labii inferioris, or depressor angular oris and mentalis. So these muscles produce expressions associated with doubt or sadness. So this is a small muscle over here. This is mentalis muscle. This is depressor labii inferioris, and above this is depressor angular oris. So where contraction of all these muscles will lead to depression of the lower lip. Another important muscle we assess is platysma. Look here. So how do we assess platysma? What we do is we ask the person to clench her teeth like this, and what you observe over here is prominence of the platysma muscle. So when the person clenches his teeth, this muscle becomes prominent, which is observed as prominence over the neck. So this muscle is platysma. Look here. So it is spread like a web over the neck. Coming to next important sensation, that is taste. Now, as we know that facial nerve conveys the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So this is the distribution of taste. So here you look, the anterior or the tip of the tongue is associated with sweet. The lateral, the anterior as well as the lateral border is associated with salty taste sensation. The lateral sides of the angle are associated with sour, whereas the posterior part of the tongue is associated with bitterness. Although a lot of overlap of the taste sensation is observed over the tongue. These we can say are the most prominent sites where these sensations are present. To go, before we proceed with this, what we need is a paper and pen where we write sweet, salt, sour and bitter. Means all the 4 taste sensations which we are going to assess. So if the person is literate, he can read these 4 words, that is sweet, salt and sour, bitter, which you have written. Then solutions for taste we need is sweet, which we make with the help of sugar. Salty solution we make with the help of common salt. Bitter solution we use quinine, whereas for sour we use lime juice. And we need separate droppers for each solution. So how do we assess taste sensation? So what we do is we ask the subject to protrude his tongue outside and we put a drop of solution on one aspect. We have to divide into right side and left side. So for example, now you have started assessing the right side of the tongue. So you will put a drop of solution on the right side of the tongue and then ask the subject to point out the taste which you have written on the paper. For example, you have used sweet one. So if he has perceived the sweet sensation properly, he will point out towards the sweet without gulping that solution inside. That is the most important instruction we are supposed to give to the subject when we are assessing taste. At no point the subject should swallow the solution. And once he points out the taste, we have to ask the subject to go and rinse his mouth properly. So the same thing we do with the different parts of the tongue, and both on the right side as well as on the left side. So if you have started with sweet, then you use salt, then sour, and bitter solution should always be used on the last. Separate droppers for separate taste solution and bitter at the last. So these are all set of instructions you have to remember when you are assessing taste sensation. That is, we are assessing right side and the left side. We are assessing different parts of the tongue, right? Tip, the lateral side, the posterior side, that way, and bitter at the last. And at every time, you have to tell the subject not to swallow the solution, and immediately after he tells you what is the taste of the solution, he is supposed to rinse his mouth every time you put the drop of the solution on the tongue. Now, what is corneal reflex? Now, here what you do is you ask the subject to open his eyes wide and look at one particular side, direction. And then from the lateral aspect of the patient, you use a sterile cotton whisk and try to touch the limbus of the cornea. Limbus is this, that is a junction of the cornea and the sclera. So from the lateral side, you will come and you will try to touch the limbus. So what is the response we get when we try to do it? It is blinking of both eyes. So that is the response we obtain when we try to look for corneal reflex. Now let us see the whole reflex of corneal reflex. So now this sclera, that is the sensations from the cornea as well as the sclera, are carried by the trigeminal nerve, that is the 5th cranial nerve. So once you touch over here, the sensations will be carried with the help of the 5th cranial nerve. So efferent is trigeminal. that is the fifth cranial nerve. So it will relay on its nucleus, and from here the relay will go to the facial nucleus. And here, if you see here, it goes both to the right side as well as the left side. So the efferents are bilateral facial nerve which supplies orbicularis oculi. So as we know, for closing the eyes, we need orbicularis oculi. So the response we get is closure of the eyes, that is blinking of the eyes when you try to touch the cornea with the wisp of cotton. So I hope you have understood this art very well. Efferent is trigeminal nerve which carries the touch sensations, and it relays then to the main sensory nucleus of the fifth cranial nerve. From there, it sends interneurons to both the facial nuclei, and from the facial nuclei, the facial nerve supply, both the facial nerve will supply the orbicularis oculi of both sides. So whenever there is ipsilateral facial palsy, the reflex will be absent on the affected side. So that is what you have to remember. Next very important reflex is acoustic reflex. So this we usually do not elicit in the labs we do here. But to remember, acoustic reflex, the efferent is cochlear nerve. That is the part of the eighth cranial nerve. So from the cochlear nerve, it will go to the cochlear nuclei of the pons. From there, it will go to the superior olivary complex. From the superior olivary complex arises efferents. Now, efferents will go to both the fifth cranial nerve as well as the seventh cranial nerve. Now, fifth cranial nerve supplies tensor tympani, whereas seventh cranial nerve supplies stapedius muscle. So, as you know, stapedius muscle is more involved in attenuation reflex. So this is how the whole reflex arm occurs. So whenever there is affection of the facial nerve, there will be paralysis of stapedius, and because of which the person will have hyperacusis. So to summarize the different features of facial palsy, to start with, first would be facial scoliosis. Means the normal side of the face gets pulls on the affected side. Then there will be, because of involvement of frontalis muscle, the person is not able to elevate his eyebrows. Means there will be loss of horizontal wrinkling over the forehead. Next, coming here, there will be lag of thalamus. Means there is inability to close the eyelids completely. Then, because there is inability to close the eyes, the person may have dry eyes or corneal ulceration. The next important sign to see is ectropion. Ectropion is eversion or outward turning of the eyelids. Now, because of ectropion, the person may have epiphora, that is overflow of tears. Now, coming to next, we have lowering of the angle of mouth. So if you ask a person to smile, the angle of the mouth will move towards the healthy side, and sometimes the person may have drooling of saliva or oral incontinence. At the same time, there is loss of corneal reflex on the affected side as well as presence of hyperacusis on the affected side. And another very important sign to see is loss of nasolabial fold. So all these are the features of facial palsy. And along with that, there is loss of taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So the facial palsy is divided into upper motor neuron lesion and lower motor neuron lesion. So coming to upper motor neuron lesion is a lesion which is present over here. Okay. So what is happening is, there is one thing to remember with facial nerve is there is bilateral representation of the upper part of face in the motor cortex. Means from here, each cortex supplies both facial nuclei. So when there is upper motor neuron lesion, means for example this side is affected. So what is going to happen? Here the person may be able to close his eyes, but weakness would be there. Of course, there would be loss. I mean, the nasolabial fold would be flat. When you ask a person to raise his eyebrows, you will see that on the both sides, the wrinkling is present. So we can say because of bilateral representation of the upper part of the face, the motor cortex, when there is upper motor neuron lesion, the upper part of the face is spared, whereas the lower part of the face will have signs of paralysis. Coming to lower motor neuron lesion. So what is lower motor neuron lesion over here? Okay, so here this set of nerves are supplying both, I mean the upper part of the face as well as the lower part of the face. So it is obvious that whenever there is lower motor neuron lesion, it will paralyze the entire half of the face, including forehead. So as you saw in upper motor neuron lesion, the forehead is spared, whereas in the lower motor neuron lesion, the entire half of the face is affected. So here what we will see, there will be failure of closure of eyelids, Bell's phenomena would be present. Again, there would be loss of the nasolabial folds. When you ask the person to raise his eyebrows, the wrinkling would be absent. So this is how we distinguish between the upper motor neuron lesion and lower motor neuron lesion. Now Bell's palsy is a lower motor neuron lesion. So usually the most common etiology we say is reactivation of herpes. So here again you see the upper motor neuron lesion is this one and lower motor neuron is this one. So there are few celebrities with Bell's palsy. I mean Anupam Kher, Angelina Jolie, Sylvester Stallone. So there are few celebrities who had Bell's palsy and they have recovered very well from it. So coming to next nerve, that is glossopharyngeal nerve or the ninth cranial nerve. Now if you look at the glossopharyngeal nerve, this here, this green structure which is highlighted here is the glossopharyngeal nerve. So if you look here, first and most important thing, it carries sensory information from the baroreceptors present in the carotid body. So this is how it is involved in the baroreceptor reflex. Second important job is it carries taste sensation. This structure is tongue. So it carries taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue here. Then it also innervates the salivary parotid gland. So it is associated with secretion of salivary glands. It also innervates stylopharyngeus muscle and superior pharyngeal constrictor muscle over here. And it also receives sensory inputs from palatine tonsils, oropharynx, middle ears, and pharyngotympanic tube, which is also known as eustachian tube. So once you remember all these functions, accordingly we decide which tests have to be performed for glossopharyngeal nerve. So again, the same set of instruments. What we need is more your torch and the swab. For taste sensation, the taste solution and with different set of droppers. So as we had done the taste sensation of with the facial nerve, similarly we do for the taste sensation for the glossopharyngeal nerve. That is, we ask the subject to protrude his tongue and then you put a drop solution on posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Remember, anterior 2/3 of the tongue sensations are carried by facial and the posterior 1/3 of the tongue are carried by glossopharyngeal nerve. So this difference you have to remember whenever you are assessing these two cranial nerves. And then once you put the drop, ask the subject to point out what is the taste of the solution and then ask him to rinse his mouth. He is not supposed to swallow the solution. Now, as you know, it is associated with the muscles of the pharynx. So, glossopharyngeal nerve also mediates somatic sensations of palate and pharynx. So he asks the subject to open his mouth. So what you observe is, this is the posterior pharyngeal wall in the figure, the posterior most structure. So these two are the pharyngeal arches. This structure is uvula. So once the subject opens his mouth with the help of torch, you can have a good illumination inside the mouth, and then you try to touch the posterior pharyngeal wall with the sterile swab. And this, to elicit the gag or the pharyngeal reflex, we need cooperation of the patient. Sometimes before you touch the posterior pharyngeal wall, the person might develop gag, no problem. So if you happen to touch the posterior pharyngeal wall, what you observe is the contraction of the palatal muscles. So this is what is gag reflex. You have to explain the patient to get his full cooperation whenever you want to assess gag reflex, or sometimes it can happen that unintentionally he may close his mouth. So we have to tell him and assure him that we are not going to harm him and we are just going to touch his posterior pharyngeal wall with the swab. So whenever there is lesion of the glossopharyngeal nerve, you will see that there is loss of taste sensation from the posterior third of the tongue. There is absence of pharyngeal reflex and also dysphagia, because it supplies the pharyngeal muscles, and pharyngeal muscles play an important role in deglutition. As it is associated with the salivary glands, lesion of glossopharyngeal nerves will be associated with decreased secretion of saliva. And as it carries the baroreceptor information towards the medulla. So lesion of glossopharyngeal nerve may be associated with orthostatic hypotension. Coming to next important nerve, that is vagus. Now look here, vagus. It has got a long route to follow, right from HNF till the visceral organs in the abdomen. So it highly innervates lot of structures. Let us see one by one. So it has got different branches, that is recurrent laryngeal nerve, which supplies all laryngeal muscles except cricopharyngeus. And this cricopharyngeus is supplied by superior laryngeal nerve, which itself is a branch of vagus. So now the motor efferents of vagus go to all pharyngeal muscles except tensor villi palatin, which is supplied by fifth cranial nerve. Now, vagus is also associated with sensations from the posterior ear, tympanic membrane, palate, as well as epiglottis. And also, it innervates viscera, including all smooth muscles and glands, and it also carries sensations from the peripheral chemoreceptors as well as baroreceptors. So, vagus has got lots of job to do. So again, we would just brush the structures present in the pharynx. So this is hard palate, and as you go posteriorly, you have the soft palate. So this small structure is uvula, which is in the center. You see these are the two pharyngeal arches. So the anterior one is known as palatoglossal arch and the posterior is known as palatopharyngeal arch. And in between these two, you have the tonsils. So when you ask the subject to open his mouth and you ask him to say ah, so when he says, you look for the arch of palate, means how much are they elevated. So this arches, whether they are formed equally, whether it is flat or depressed on one side. So this is how you assess the vagus nerve. So if there is weakness or lesion of vagus nerve, what is going to happen? On the affected side, the arch is going to drop, means there will be failure of elevation of palate on the affected side. And because this side is healthy, what is going to happen? The healthy muscles are going to pull the uvula towards themselves. So uvula gets deviated to the normal side because of unopposed action of the healthy side. So in this diagram, it is obvious that there is weakness of left vagus nerve, because of which the arch has dropped on the left side and the uvula is deviated to right side. So remember, whenever there is vagus nerve lesion, uvula deviates to opposite side and the arch of palate drops on the affected side. So here we ask the subject to cough. So cough is always associated with an explosive nature. So whenever there is vocal cord palsy, especially because of involvement of recurrent laryngeal nerve, we lose this explosive nature of the cough. And this type of cough is known as bovine cough. So why this happens is because of vocal cord palsy, the person cannot close his glottis completely. And as he is not able to close the glottis completely, the explosive nature of the cough is lost. Another way to assess cranial nerve, both the cranial nerves, that is 9th and 10th cranial nerve together, is swallowing. As we know, swallowing involves coordinated action of both laryngeal as well as pharyngeal muscles. So here we ask the subject to drink sips of water. And as he drinks sips of water, we observe for swallowing, that is movement of the thyroid cartilage, how it moves properly or not. And we ask whether the person has got any difficulty in swallowing or pain during swallowing. So lesions of vagus nerve will be, the features would be first, loss of pharyngeal and palatal reflex, which is associated with dysphagia, that is difficulty in swallowing. Then the person may also have nasal regurgitation. Now, why nasal regurgitation? Because for if this deglutition to occur properly, there should be proper approximation of the soft palate with the posterior pharyngeal wall, so that the bolus of the food is pushed towards the esophagus. So if this approximation is not there, the food is going to enter into the nasal cavity, that is known as nasal regurgitation. The next important sign we see is uvula deviates to healthy side. There would also be impairment of the baroreceptor sensitivity. Now, as we know that the vagus, it carries the baroreceptor information from the aortic bodies. So if there is lesion of this branch of vagus nerve, the baroreceptor mechanism would be impaired and the person can have orthostatic hypotension. Now, another important feature which is present in vagus nerve lesion is hoarseness of voice because of involvement of recurrent laryngeal nerve. And there could be vocal cord palsy also. Now, this vocal cord palsy is of two types. That is, if there is bilateral abductor weakness, the person may have risk of stridor and respiratory obstruction. Or if there is bilateral adductor weakness, there would be inability to, the approximation of the vocal cords would be affected. So there would be dysphonia, as well as there would be bovine cough, that is inability to generate the normal explosive cough. So these would be present in case of bilateral affection. If there is unilateral lesion, that is usually associated with dysphonia, because vocal cord movements plays an important role in phonation. So, to summarize, when you are assessing facial nerve, we look for motor function of frontalis, orbicularis oculi, buccinator, orbicularis oris, levator angularis oris, platysma. So these motor functions have to be assessed both sides. So we assess both these muscles simultaneously to look for any asymmetry. We also look for presence of hyperacusis, whether it is absent or present, and corneal reflex, whether it is absence or presence. So Blinking of the eyes is the response. So what we look for is the response. Taste sensation, we have to assess the anterior 2/3 and the posterior 1/3 separately, and on the right side and the left side for sweet, sour, salty and bitter. Bitter has to be assessed at the last. For glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve, we have to look for nasal regurgitation, whether it is present or absent. Presence of nasal twang when he is speaking, whether it is present or absent. Position of the uvula. So for this, we have to ask the subject to open his mouth and say ah. So when he says, when he does it, you look whether uvula is central or whether it is deviated to one side. We also look for elevation of the pharyngeal arches, whether it is present and absent, whether it is present unilaterally or bilaterally. Then presence of pharyngeal reflex or gag reflex, whether it is present or absent. Movements of larynx, whether it is present or absent. At the same time, we look for swallowing, movements of associated with swallowing, whether it is present or absent. Dysarthria, that is alteration in speech, and dysphonia. So by looking for all these points, we are assessing glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve together. So eat healthy, stay healthy, and get plenty of sleep. Take good care of yourself. Thank you very much for your patient listening.